Let's talk about pending I-751s. So a lot of people have been commenting on my videos, asking questions ranging from, am I at risk of getting detained if I fly domestically in an airport with an I-751 pending, to should I submit more evidence? My I-751 has been pending for like 16 months. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to answer a lot of those questions, to explain what the risks are, what you should be worried about if your I-751 is pending. And for those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Puyan Darian. I'm an immigration attorney focused exclusively on family-based immigration. This is what I do, so I thought I would make a video answering your questions here. Okay, so I recently made a video explaining that a lot of people are being detained in airports even when they have green card applications pending. And a bunch of the comments to that video were about pending I-751s and what are the risks for people who are conditional residents. The risks to conditional residents are totally different because you are already a permanent resident. So that video I made about people being detained in airports didn't mean to apply to conditional residents. I didn't intend to scare people who have conditional residence because for most intents and purposes, a conditional residency card is permanent residence. It gives you all the same rights and privileges as a permanent resident. The only exception is that if you fail to file the I-751 before your green card expires, you are likely to end up in removal proceedings. And if your I-751 gets denied, you are also very likely, probably certainly, going to end up in removal proceedings. So with that caveat, as long as you file the I-751 on time, you're still a permanent resident. You should still be able to travel domestically and internationally as a permanent resident. Anyone who's less than a permanent resident, and by that I mean conditional resident or permanent resident, anyone who doesn't have a green card at all is probably at higher risk of having immigration problems if they encounter ICE. But once you have your conditional resident card, I would treat that as a full green card, with the one caveat that you do need to file your I-751 on time and eventually get it approved. One big change that we've been seeing with I-751s pending, and this has been happening for months now, this isn't like a super recent thing from August 2026, this has been happening for most of 2026, is we are seeing a dramatic increase in the number of home visits. So USCIS investigators will just randomly show up to your house. This isn't statistically likely to happen, but it's happening at a way higher frequency than it was in previous years. In fact, historically, we wouldn't see USCIS investigating or doing home visits during the I-751 process. And frankly, I think it's a good thing, because if you're in a good faith marriage and you're living there with your spouse and your landlord knows that you're both living there and a neighbor or two can attest to the fact that you're both living there, that can be really helpful. It can help your I-751 get approved faster. And I've had clients who've told me, USCIS investigators showed up to their house while the I-751 was pending. They were kind of happy that they were there because they were living there in a good faith marriage, so they allowed them in. They spoke with them for 30 minutes, and then, within a week or two after that home visit, the I-751 got approved. So it actually ended up speeding up the process, and it was beneficial for them. The people who probably have something to worry about when their I-751 pending is when they filed it jointly based on a good faith marriage to their spouse and they are no longer living together, and whether they're just temporarily separated or in the process of getting fully divorced. That's the situation where I would be more cautious. Because just for example, there are a couple different examples of situations where this could be seriously problematic and result in deportation proceedings. But one notable example is if you have been married in a good faith marriage and you were living together when you filed the I-751 and you were sharing your lives and you had a bunch of great evidence to prove that the marriage was real, and then you subsequently had major marital problems, and by the way, I handle tons of these cases where people are filing the I-751 after entering a good faith marriage and then ending up in divorce or separation, which leads to divorce. And if you're in one of those situations, you should consult with me because I handle tons of these cases, and we could have really good outcomes when there's sufficient evidence that it was a good faith marriage. But the big problem I see people having is they don't inform USCIS that the divorce is pending. And then if something happens like the I-751 based on good faith marriage gets approved after the final divorce date, like let's say your divorce is finalized today, and then tomorrow you get an I-751 approval notice based on still being married, there's a good argument that that I-751 approval was in error, and you are likely to have problems when it's time for you to file your N-400, your application for naturalization, so just be careful. There are other scenarios there where I would also be very careful if you are planning on getting divorced. Again, I've made several videos on this topic. I handle tons of these cases. So if this applies to you, I do strongly recommend scheduling a consultation and talking with an attorney about it. I did also recently post a video about some permanent residents who got their green card through marriage being placed into removal proceedings, where in the notice to appear, USCIS alleges that the green card was issued in error and the person never actually became a permanent resident, and therefore they're in the US out of status. Now, this is a recent pattern and trend, as I mentioned in that video. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out. We posted it yesterday, I believe. That's not going to apply to most people. And that issue is not specific to the I-751, so it's not particularly relevant here. The people who probably have to worry about this the most are the people who've been waived through the border or who got a really strong request for evidence alleging that they didn't qualify for permanent residence, and they were able to overcome that request for evidence and eventually became a permanent resident. What happened in the example that I described in the last video I posted was the person was waived through the border. So some people drive through the border. It happens a lot for Canadians actually, where the customs officer is like, yeah, whatever, just enter the US, you're probably fine. And that waive through is inspection for immigration purposes. And if that person enters and subsequently applies for adjustment of status through an immediate relative petition, for example, marriage to a US citizen, they are eligible for adjustment of status. Now, during the USCIS interview process, they usually need to provide details about their entry. Like usually we provide a detailed affidavit, detailed explanation of the circumstances of the entry, and if USCIS believes that you entered with inspection, then they have the ability to approve your adjustment of status. There's a case that's on point here from the Board of Immigration Appeals called Matter of Quilantan. So if we call that a Quilantan entry, and a lot of people who've had Quilantan entries are now being placed into removal proceedings even though they are permanent residents. But that's not a specific issue for the I-751. I would say 99.9% of conditional residents who have their I-751 pending have nothing to worry about. So I wouldn't freak out about this just because your I-751 is pending. A lot of people have also been asking about the timeline. You know, someone posted recently, my I-751 has been pending for 16 months. Should I update the evidence now or wait for USCIS to issue a request for evidence? You know, once your I-751 has been pending for about a year and a half, which 16 months, you're almost there, I would probably update and submit an addendum. If you have an electronic I-751 pending and you have access to your online portal, it would be a good idea at that point to just update all your evidence and then submit it all at one time. You know, updated bank statements, lease agreements, insurance documents, photographs, trips and travel, all that good stuff. Organize it all and upload it. It doesn't really make a difference. Like USCIS isn't just going to deny your I-751 because you haven't updated it in a year and a half, but it could help you avoid a request for evidence and result in a timelier approval. If your evidence was insufficient, like for example, someone else posted, what if we only had 1 year of financial documents when we submitted their I-751? So I wasn't exactly sure what this person was asking. Presumably they have 2 years of all the other types of evidence, like proof they've been living together, sharing their lives together, but they only had bank statements for 1 year before they filed their I-751. So in that situation, it would be more prudent to file an updated I-751 evidence package once your case has been pending for another year or a year and a half. Because what could happen, there are actually three things that could happen at this point. Once your case has been pending for a year and a half, you could get a request for evidence, which is probably likely if your evidence is insufficient. If your evidence was totally lacking, like you basically just filed an I-751 and a couple photographs, you could get a notice of intent to deny, which would only give you 30 days to respond with all of your updated evidence. You could totally overcome it, but that's a very aggressive version of the request for evidence, which typically gives you 87 days to respond. Or USCIS can just skip those things and schedule you for an interview to speak with you and your spouse directly. If you filed an N-400 to naturalize while your I-751 is pending, you're almost certainly going to get a combo interview where they're going to start by doing the I-751 interview with you and your spouse, and then the N-400 with just the citizenship, the naturalization applicant, the immigrant spouse. If you don't file the N-400 though, it's quite common for there to be no interview before they approve the I-751. And that's even true if there was no interview for your initial green card, your marriage-based green card. You know, during the Biden administration, many of these were getting approved without interviews if you submitted enough evidence that you were in a good faith marriage. The officer had the discretion to do that. They no longer do. At the very least, I would say 99.9%. Every single one of my cases that have been marriage-based green cards, no matter how strong, have resulted in an interview pretty much since the Trump administration took power. So even if your initial green card was issued without an interview, if you have tons of evidence, your I-751 can also be approved without an interview. And also, before I said there were three possibilities: RFE, notice of intent to deny, or an interview. There could also be a combination of these things. So sometimes an officer will issue a request for evidence, give you an opportunity to avoid an interview, and if they are still unsatisfied, then they could schedule an interview. And by the way, they don't have to schedule an interview. They can just respond by denying your I-751 if your RFE response is insufficient. I haven't seen that happen with any of my cases, but another attorney recently posted that that happened to one of their cases. So be careful. When you get an RFE, you need to take it super seriously. Don't just submit like one bank statement from each year or like some of your evidence. Go all out. Organize your evidence and submit it. If you're not sure, speak with an attorney. If you don't know an attorney, I handle these cases nationwide. You could schedule a consultation by clicking the link in the video description below. All right, guys, so those are some of the most common questions that we've been getting. I tried to answer them all in one comprehensive video on the I-751. Like I said, we handle tons of these cases, whether you're in a good faith marriage, separated, or getting divorced. I'd be happy to discuss your case with you, create a strategy, and if you need an attorney, I can handle your case. If you need instructions on how to schedule a consultation, you can click the link in the video description below, or give my office a call if you just have like a general question and you're not ready to book a consultation yet. For example, you want to know how much our services cost, things like that. We would be happy to answer those questions over the phone. If you're new to my channel and you want to stay up to date on changes under the Trump administration, be sure to subscribe. And the big favor I have to ask of all of you who've gotten any value whatsoever from my channel, just give the video a thumbs up, or if you don't like the topic, give it a thumbs down. And if you have other questions that you want me to answer in future videos, throw it in the comments. I do read them before I film videos, and I'd be happy to answer them in future videos. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time for another video.